So let's explore and learn street names in the heart downtown with Carla Michaels. Thank you for being here, and thank you all for being here.
Okay, thank you. Pat, this is you're the head librarian.
Oh, no, I'm just one of four.
Oh, okay. Well, she's a quarter head of the library.
I'm the left arm or something.
Yeah, there you go.
Great
Thank
job.
you, Pat.
You're welcome.
It's great to be here. I really appreciate everybody wanting to come out and learn a little bit about Cary history today. The program, well, my name is Carla Michaels. I grew up here in Cary, went to Cary High School. I did graduate, went on and graduated from North Carolina State. And then my husband's Navy career took us away for a while, but then after he retired, I came back and plunged into Cary history and learning all about it. And the program came about just riding around with my dad. We would ride in his pickup truck. Of course, he had to have a pickup truck. And we were riding around here at downtown Cary, and he would talk about the different street names and the different houses along the way. And so I really got interested in not only Cary history, but why the names were as they were. So he was born right on Chatham Street in downtown Cary. If you know where the Perfect Peace gift shop is, it was three doors down from that now. And so he had a love of Cary history, and he shared that with me. So when I go to other towns, I'm looking at street signs and I'm wondering, well, do these street names mean anything? So then a few years ago we had the idea of coming up with a program that would tell the story, some of the story of Cary history by looking at street signs. So that's kind of what we're going to do today. If you have a working knowledge of Cary history, I'm hoping that I will give you something new today so that it won't just be a rehash of what you already know. So this is the plan for today. I don't know if you can see it, but there's lots of little dotted lines on this map. And so we're going to cover the names really in downtown Cary. To orient you with this map is from like the 1960s. It was one of the simpler maps that I could find. This is Chatham Street right here, and this is Academy Street. So right now we are right here in the bend of this road of Dry Avenue and Academy. And then all the other names kind of revolve around, you know, that crossroad there. The first street that we're going to cover is, we're going to start with an old stage road. And that stage road ran through Cary before Cary was even a thought in anybody's mind. Cary was incorporated in 1871. But it was a village or a settlement or even just a wide place in the road far before it was incorporated. But even before that, before people started settling here, before Wake County was formed, we see a road through what is Cary now. This is, if you can see the J in Johnston County, it's sort of in the middle of that map. It's along a stage road that ran from Newbern up to Hillsborough. And so around where the J is about where Cary was, and you can see there's nothing there. In this map, that 1770, it does show Johnston County, and just to let you know, in the earliest days of North Carolina, Craven County started at the coast, and we were part of Craven County here. It extended all the way up here, and then later Johnston County came out of that. And then later they carved Wake County, where we are now, out of Johnston County. So, you know, there was a lot of changes, but here we are, right here. This stage road is right along here, and then you can see Hillsborough up in the corner. So it ran from the coast all the way up to Hillsborough. So that's way, way before the beginning of Cary. So now we're just before the beginning of Cary. We moved up a little bit. We're 1808, and you can see the remnants of this stage road right through here. This one is the one that ran up to Hillsborough. And you can see, I've circled on the map, something called Bradford's Ord. And that stood for Bradford's Ordinary. And an ordinary was an inn or a tavern, kind of a hotel that stagecoaches could stop at along the way. And the Bradford's Ordinary was what we think of now as Cary, okay? Now, it was a simple building. This is what we think it kind of looked like. This is part of a larger schematic, but I'm just showing the part that was Bradford's Ordinary. In the top left, you can see this two-story house, or ordinary, with two chimneys. Ignore the lean-to thing on the back, because that wasn't there originally. Then you can see the hip roof in the middle, and then you can see the side view. So it was kind of a modest building, but probably one of the grander buildings along the way from Raleigh to Hillsborough. And, you know, the accommodation was probably welcome. If you had ridden a stagecoach from Raleigh to Bradford's Ordinary, it would have been 8 miles along dirty, bumpy roads. And so you were probably happy to see a building of this kind when you got there. So that was Bradford's Ordinary. Now, John Bradford was, you know, a man who lived here. I've tracked his movements in the 1770s up to 1810. There's no proof that he actually owned the ordinary or the land that the ordinary sat on, but he was a prominent and later kind of a scandalized figure in the area, and he left the scene in about 1810. We're fairly certain that the ordinary stood on the town hall grounds. So it's really kind of interesting. We'll see a little more about the owners of Bradford's Ordinary a little bit later in the program, but this is what it might have looked like from on the stagecoach road from Raleigh to Hillsborough. We know that he disappeared from the scene in about 1810. There couldn't find any further records about him afterwards. But we know that Nancy Jones of the Nancy Jones house ran a stagecoach stop after that, so maybe she was just picking up where John Bradford left off, you know, filling a very much a need in the stagecoach route between Raleigh and Hillsborough. So, where can we detect some of the remnant of that road? Well, there's a little street called Hillsborough Street off of it's North Harrison Avenue at that point. It kind of looks like this. There's a gas station on the right-hand side. There's some, some businesses on the left, and across the street is the railroad depot. This is on North Harrison Avenue. And if you follow Hillsborough Street, you get down to Dixon Avenue and the town dump. But my dad had told me that if you keep going through the dump, there was a road that ran along there and then kind of came up and crossed the railroad tracks at Maynard Road. And so we think that's part of that old stage road that ran from Raleigh to Hillsborough. Now, here's another view. You know, on my computer screen, all these slides look really, really good. But I'm kind of concerned that people in the room can't see it. But this is a North Carolina Railroad map. The North Carolina Railroad started about 1851, and it was finished about 1856. Fortunately for us, the surveyors of this railroad company had to make drawings of all the properties along the railroad route. So we are really lucky that we have the portion of Cary that was along that route, and this is what it is. So you can see this pink line, it's pink. This pink line is the railroad right-of-way, and this would have been the stage road that ran through. It's not exactly oriented north, but that's the way it ran through Cary. Now, Ferris Yates bought the land around 1841. So you can kind of tell that the stagecoach road and the railroad kind of ran sort of parallel to each other. They might have crossed every once in a while, but they were running contiguous with each other, I guess I could say. Now, this is a closer look because we have Ferris Yates's property. He bought the property that had the Bradford's Ordinary House on it, and so probably lived in it, in the house. And so that's a picture of him. Ferris Yates probably decided that he didn't like the railroad running so close to his house, so he sold out. And he went down and bought a mill, which is now known as Yates Mill. And so that was Ferris Yates's story. I don't blame him. I wouldn't want the railroad running through my front yard either. The railroad came along in the 1850s, in the 1850s, and there was a street called Railroad Street. The Railroad Street really ran along probably the stagecoach line, or close to it, and it was the main street of Cary. So if you see this is from the Articles of Incorporation from the town of Cary in 1871. It said, "The limits of said town shall be lines that run at a distance of 1/2 mile from the warehouse of the Chatham Railroad Company in said town and parallel with the four walls thereof." Have you seen any of these signs along the way coming into Cary? Those mark the boundaries of the original town, the original square mile. I put this one on Kildare Farm Road. That's just beyond the elementary school playground. So be on the lookout for those. If you'll notice, they've kind of got what's a stylized dogwood in the back of them, because the dogwood used to be on the, well, it's on the seal of the town of Cary, but we don't use that dogwood in promoting Cary at this point. So this was Railroad Street, Cary's main street, and I wish my pointer worked on the TV, but it doesn't. Just to orient you, this is the Page Walker Hotel, this is the railroad, and here's the other railroad that came later. And this was Railroad Street right here. This is Academy Street. Chatham Street did not exist. And so all the businesses were along Railroad Street. So it was the main shopping district of the town. The area that Railroad Street is now, do you know where Scratch Kitchen is in Cary? That used to be called Railroad Street at Cedar Street now. And so all along there were businesses. You know, when Chatham Street was developed, Railroad Street just was sort of an afterthought. You sort of used it as a cut through if the train was blocking the crossings at Harrison Avenue and Academy Street. But now it's kind of coming back to life. You know, Bond Brothers Brewery is along there, Scratch Kitchen, some other businesses are along there now. So it's kind of revitalized itself more recently. So that was Railroad Street, which is now Cedar Street. But let's talk about Chatham Street next. Okay, we have Chatham Street, east and west, and everybody's familiar with Chatham Street because it's one of the main arteries in town. The locomotive, this one's circa 1870, about the time the Cary was incorporated. That's really what named Chatham Street, because Chatham Street ran from Cary down to Chatham County and to the coal fields. There are coal fields in Chatham County, and that was a really important thing that we needed for industrialization. And so they never really made a go of it, but the Chatham Railroad was in existence. This is a picture of West Chatham Street looking west. It's like I'm at the intersection of Academy and Chatham here in front of Old Ashworth Drugstore and looking west. So that's what it looked like about 1926. And this is kind of what it looks like today. Not too different. I would not suggest that you stand in the middle of the street and take a picture like I did that day, but I did have the light. I was in the pedestrian crossing at the time. But it looks, you know, pretty similar to what it did back then. the bank is on the corner, and in that block there used to be a post office and a bank and some other businesses. They are in much smaller buildings. That's what we have today. Now this is a hand-drawn map, and I want to point out here, this is Railroad Street here, and it says business section in Raleigh Road. So this is what I was just talking about as the main street of Cary. And then this is West Chatham Street here. East Chatham Street did not exist. I put a little dotted line in here. This is from 1926. And Chatham Street was just, East Chatham Street was more like a little country lane. There were some pastures, there were little homes out there, but you know, not much was going on East Chatham Street. This is an early picture up at the top when Chatham Street did get developed. There's some houses, but you can see there's not a whole lot going on. And this one down here, this is the perfect piece where you know that is. There's Big Dom's Bagels. In here, Felice's Wood-Fired Grill. A bunch of businesses are there now. So it's kind of changed a lot, hasn't it, in all those years. It was a country lane, but in the 1910s, 1920s, there was a program called the Good Roads Program in North Carolina, and then there were federal auto trails that were being developed that made travel by automobile a whole lot easier. So when the road system in our area was improved, the powers that be decided to reroute traffic from Railroad Street and bring it down this newly created Chatham Street. And so it was part of US number 1 highway that ran all the way from Maine all the way down to Florida. And so it brought all the traffic from US number 1 all the way through Cary. So anybody that wanted to go from points north to points south would come right smack through downtown Cary. So quite a lot of traffic through town. So that little country lane turned into a pretty busy thoroughfare. Because it was US number 1 and could get people from wherever they were going down to Florida and then back again, a lot of little motels sprang up along the way. And actually these were vintage postcards from 3 that were in Cary. The first one at the top is called Cooper's Hotel, Motor Hotel. And later, I mean, it's just been torn down. It was down out there by where the Subway sandwich shop is on Chatham Street. The second one was let's go to this one, because this one's closer into town. It's on Chatham Street. It was on Chatham Street. It has been torn down. It was on West Chatham Street, around West Street, and it was Sutton Motor Court. And then this last one was Knotty Pines Motor Court. It was on the way out to the Cary Garden Supply, if you know where that is. All those are gone because the age of the automobile and automobile travel has kind of gone away now. People don't do that mode of travel anymore. But that was just a part of the life of Cary for a long time, was all these people coming through downtown. As a matter of fact, my grandfather at one time owned the one that's called Cooper's. It was called Little Tampa. And my dad, as a teenager, would sit out by a neon sign that my grandfather had made especially for that, and it had a light switch on it. And my father could tell out of state license plates from a long way away, because they were all different at the time. And so he would sit out there by the sign and would notice cars coming, and if they were from out of town, he would flip the switch to get people's attention, to say, if you need a place to stay, you can stay at Little Tampa. And so that's how they drummed up business for the little hotel that they owned for a while. So enough about hotels. We'll move on here to Academy Street. Oh, I did want to mention one other thing, though, about Highway number 1. Highway 1 goes way outside of Cary now. But Mr. Russell Heater, in 1951, decided that he was going to propose that the town council consider installing 4 lanes of Highway number 1 right down Chatham Street. Can you imagine what that would have caused, in Cary if number 1 had come straight through town? Fortunately, that was voted down, and so we still have 2 lanes of Chatham Street, and we have the old Railroad Street, and US number 1 is a long, long way out of town. But I appreciate Anna Redling, a former Cary town planner, dug into some town council minutes and found that. And I was really alarmed when I read it, but I was relieved too. So now we can go on to Academy Street. And Academy Street is just right out here. It runs north and south, and the little star on the map is where the Page Walker Hotel sits. Just to give you some bearing, and of course, as I said, we're right here right now. So, Academy Street, since we dodged the bullet for Chatham Street, we are going to go on to Academy Street. It's Cary's residential street. At the head of Academy Street, right across the street from us, was Cary High School. The first building that's what it looked like. It was a wooden building. Frank Page, the founder of Cary, donated 4 acres of land and the timber that was on it to build this school. The school was built and opened in January of 1870 before the town was incorporated. Now, what do you notice about the advertisement? I don't know if you can read it. What do you notice about this right here?
Different spelling.
Yeah, Cary is misspelled. It was misspelled on our original articles of incorporation, and we had to have that changed. It had that E in it, and the E stayed in there at various times through the years, but we finally got it sorted out. Frank Page built this as a private school for boys and girls, and education really has been the focus of the street for its entire life. There's still Cary Elementary School there. A lot of the residential homes along Academy Street were used as boarding houses for the students at Cary High School. Yes, Cary was a boarding school. I was telling one lady today who's from Morrisville that my grandmother lived in Morrisville, and in 1909 she became a boarding student at Cary High School because she couldn't get back and forth from Morrisville every day. There wasn't a bus. You couldn't rely on the trains to get you there on time, so she was a boarding student at Cary High School. Now, with the exception of the Baptist church just down the street, which wasn't built on Academy Street until 1926, Academy Street really was residential from the Methodist church all the way up to the school. This impressive house was on Academy Street. It sat where the old library used to be, just across the street. It was called the residence of the principal. At this time, it was the home of Professor Middleton, who ran the school. It had been built by the Jones family, probably in the early 1870s, from what we can tell. Along through the years, a number of the residential houses have been pulled down. The post office sits on where some old houses were. The old library building just across the street. The Maiden Inn, there were a couple of houses that sat there. They were replaced by a little office building, and the office building was torn down to build the Maiden. So there's been a bit of a change along Academy Street, but fortunately enough houses have been saved that it really kind of retains its original residential character, I think, pretty well. And of course we have this park out here too. This is a fun picture of, I think that the photographer was probably standing on the steps of Cary High School and shooting up Academy Street, and this is all of the children. Professor Dry is in the back. He's the one in the black suit, and beside him is a teacher, I think is Miss Irma Ellis, who was a longtime teacher. And if you'll notice, the older children are wearing shoes and the younger children are barefoot. So hopefully this was at the beginning or the end of the school year and not during, in any other time of the year. But you can see that there were, the houses on the right really are where the park is now. So a few changes have been made, but I just love that picture that just has that residential feel to it. Okay, let's move on to Dr. Waldo. Waldo Street runs down by the post office and the Methodist Church, and it runs for quite a ways back into a residential area. And Dr. Waldo was born in 1845 in Martin County, and I didn't know where Martin County was. I'm not up on all my North Carolina counties, but it's east of Rocky Mount and it's on the Roanoke River. He served during the Civil War, that's him in his Confederate grays, and after the war he went to medical school and studied at the Washington University School of Medicine in Baltimore. And he graduated in 1868, so he had a really quick turnaround from the war. And when he went to do his residency, he was in Oxford, North Carolina, which is north of here, and he did his residency with a Dr. Owen. Well, he happened to meet the doctor's daughter and married her, and moved around 1874 with his wife and 3 sons down to Cary to practice medicine. And he and his family were really active in the community, in Methodist Church and so forth. Now he owned a drugstore, and this was on Railroad Street. You can see S.P. Waldo and Company. It must have been sort of like the local Walmart at the time, because he's selling drugs, paints, oils, groceries, toilet articles, and perfumery. A little bit of everything. That was dated 1885. I found this in an estate file online, but he was a really beloved figure in Cary. He would charge $1 for an office visit and $1 a mile to go out into the country to treat people. He had a number of years of failing health, and he died fairly young in 1891, and it was a real loss to the community when he passed away. Now his house sat on Waldo Street. It sat behind the post office and what is now a parking lot. So it looks a little bit run down there, but it was saved. And now it sits behind the Maiden Inn and its park offices at this point. So if you're walking down Park Street at Maiden, you can just glance over and you'll know that was formerly Dr. Waldo's home. The name Waldo pops up in another street name. Has anybody heard of Waldo Rood? Okay, yes. Well, Waldo Rood was the grandson of Dr. Waldo. So now you know that there's a long family connection of the Waldos here in town, and Waldo Rood served as mayor of Cary from 1949 to 1961. That's a really long time. So he was an influential person in Cary history. But there are more influential families in Cary history, and we're going to talk about Walker Street. Walker Street runs by the Perfect Peace and on the other side of the park. So Walker Street is just across the way here. Well, this is what it looks like. I took this before they built the building on Chatham Street on the corner, but on the left-hand side, right over here, my cursor works, is Big Dom's Bagels, to give you a little idea. And my back was toward the railroad tracks, so I was looking south here. But it was named for the Walker family, Helen Yates and Jacob Walker. This is her as a young woman. They bought the hotel and 3¼ acres of land from Frank Page in 1884. Now they had previously bought 26 acres from Frank Page just before the town was incorporated, and part of that land butted up against Walker Street, so that's why it's named for them. The Walker family was from Rollsville, and Jacob Walker worked for the railroad, so we're pretty sure that the railroad brought the family to Cary. And Helen Yates Walker was a native of Cary. Her father, Carlos Yates, lived right beyond the border of Cary as you head out toward Raleigh. Now, Jacob was a section master of the railroad. That meant he had a section of track that he was responsible for and had a crew that would take care of it and make sure that it was maintained. But when Frank Page decided to sell properties around Cary and move down to Aberdeen, the Walkers probably recognized that that was a pretty good business opportunity for them because they lived right across, kitty corner across the railroad tracks from the hotel. They bought the hotel, and it was called the Walker Hotel for many, many years, and this is the earliest picture that we have of the hotel. It's now the Page Walker Arts and History Center. So this was, I think, about 1915, 1916 or so, I think, is when that picture was taken. Jacob died in 1915, so Helen tried to keep the hotel going. She ran it as a boarding house and had students from Cary High School board with her. She died in 1922, and the property passed to her grandchildren, and I'll explain why it passed to her grandchildren and not to her child by talking about Hunter Street. And I don't know if you're familiar with Hunter Street, but as you head out Chatham Street going toward Raleigh, you'll pass Walker Street, then there's Templeton, and then there's Hunter Street. So there's a big development going on there. There's a big apartment building complex going up right now, close to Hunter Street. This is what it looks like now. All the development is going on behind my back. And it was named for Irene Walker Hunter, who married Reverend Alcee Hunter. Irene was the only child of Jacob and Helen Walker. They lived on some of the Walker property. Reverend Hunter had been married before. He had one daughter by his first marriage, and so he married Irene, and they had 4 children. And then, sadly, Irene died, and so he had 5 children. So he married again, and he had a child with the 3rd wife, and then, unfortunately, Reverend Hunter died. So the stepmother is left with children from 3 marriages, and interestingly enough, as I've researched the family, I found that they all had a pretty good relationship with each other. But when Jacob and then eventually Helen Walker died, the hotel passed to the 4 children of their daughter. And so that's where the Hunter name comes from, and how the hotel passed to her grandchildren, their grandchildren. Now, the best known of the 4 Hunter children was Dr. John P. Hunter, and he obviously was born here in town. He graduated from Cary High School. He went to Wake Forest College and graduated and became a doctor. And he was a doctor in town from 1920 until 1959. Had a long practice here. He lived right over there. He's in the bungalow that's right outside the windows here. And I don't know if you've ever noticed, but there's a chicken coop behind his house. It's one of the last chicken coops in town. We're hoping that it will be preserved. And someone on the Friends of the Page Walker said they should sell ice cream there and call it Scoops from the Coop. So we'll have to see if that ever happens. That would be great. But that's Dr. Hunter's house. And so there's the connection between the Page Walker and the Hunter house. As you're walking around town, think about that connection. So we'll move on to Templeton Street. Remember I said you've got Walker Street is right here behind us, and then the next street over is Templeton, and then this was Hunter Street. So Templeton is this teeny tiny little street between 2 larger streets. That's it. You know, you go across the crosswalk, Templeton Street starts, and you take a few steps and Templeton Street ends. It's this really tiny street, but Dr. Templeton and his family, who it's named for, really had a big impact on Cary history. This is a picture of Dr. James McPherson Templeton. The younger picture of him is on the left. It's at the bottom right-hand corner of a page from the Cary High School catalog. He was on the board of directors there. He was a stockholder. And then there's a picture of him a little bit later on in life with his beard. We were wondering if he had a beard, Barb, and he does. He has a beard. He was born about 1855 in Morrisville, not Morrisville, but Mooresville, which is Iredell County. But he grew up in Lincolnton, and he went to the University of the City of New York. He attended medical lectures there, and then he went and graduated from medical school in Baltimore. Came to Cary in 1884. I'm not really sure what caused him to show up in Cary, but he did. And he married Rachel Jones, who was the granddaughter of Nathaniel Jones of White Plains, who was a very influential person in the very earliest part of Cary history. He was a medical doctor here for years and years. He had a home behind what was Cary High School at the time. It would have been on what is now the grounds of Cary Elementary. And this little building right here was probably his office. And with the playground, he was probably happy to make house calls at the time. But it faced Kildare Farm Road. So as you're driving down Kildare Farm Road and passing Cary Elementary, you can think of Dr. Templeton. He was very influential. This is a bigger picture. This is a map, a little bit later map. You can see Chatham Street does exist now, and the long oval is Dr. Templeton's, the street named for the family. And you can see that this was part of the Hunter property when that was part of the Walker property that descended to the Hunter family after the deaths of the Walkers. So that's what that map is all about. Dr. Templeton had a long and varied career. Not only was he a doctor, but he was appointed to the General Assembly as a Wake County trustee to coordinate the planning of that great central highway, the US #1 that kind of came through and rerouted business down Chatham Street, developed Chatham Street rather than Railroad Street. So he was the president of the Good Roads Association, of course, and being a country doctor and having to make house calls, he knew what it was like to not have good roads, and so he wanted to have good roads. He was a member of the Methodist Church, and he was a temperance leader in town, which meant that he did not want to have anything to do with alcohol. He ran for the North Carolina Senate twice as a temperance candidate. He did not win. And he also ran for governor on the temperance program, platform. And he did not win as the governor either, but he really felt very strongly about it. He gave many, many speeches on temperance during the course of his career. He served on the board of directors of Cary High School, was on the Cary School Committee. He farmed, he owned a sawmill, and he even joined into the World War I cause and was a doctor. He served in Florida for a time as a military doctor. His uniform is at the Page Walker Hotel in the little museum, so if you ever want to see his World War I military uniform, you can certainly go there and see that. And he treated people regardless of their ability to pay. His daughter Elva said that some patients would bring him a watermelon or a chicken or the best of something that they had if they did not have the money to pay. And some of them did not have money to pay and could not pay anything, but he treated them anyway. And his grave marker in Hillcrest Cemetery says, a country doctor who served his nation in time of war, his community in the time of peace, the rich and poor alike. And that's really a fitting tribute to Dr. Templeton. So now we're going to go to a little street that doesn't even exist anymore. It's sort of there if you know how to look for it, but it's called Jones Street. It's named for the Jones family, whose patriarch was Rufus Henry Jones. We know the picture the older picture is definitely him. On the right, I was doing some research and ran across some unlabeled photos of the Jones family, and I feel like that's Rufus Jones on the left. So I put them both together so you can see them side by side. He bought lot number 1 in Cary from Frank Page. Let's see if I wrote that down, the That was 1869, so that was before Cary was actually incorporated. And if you'll notice that, I took it on the steps of the Ivy Ellington House before the Ivy Ellington House was moved to the library. And so a lot of construction is going on in this site now, but the buildings across the street are still the same. It's on Chatham Street, and if you know the walk-up bar, that's what you're looking at across the street. And so that's what Rufus Jones owned in 1869. Today, there's a colorful mural on the side of the building that sits right at the corner of Jones Street. Jones Street was a little dog leg. You could drive down. Now it's sort of just the parking lot of Fidelity Bank, but you could drive down and take a right-hand turn, and it would join back up into Academy Street, and that was called Jones Street. It no longer really exists on the map, but I wanted to talk about Rufus Jones, so I added it into the program here. This was his house. He was the one who built this house on Academy Street on the old library lot. We recently came across this photo, and we think, you really can't see it, but there's this little lady right here, and we think that was his wife, Sarah, right after Rufus died. We think this picture was taken in 1903, 1904, when, right around the time Rufus died. So we're going to go back up a little ways north of town now to Ambassador Loop. And Ambassador Loop runs right in front of the Page Walker Hotel. The reason I wanted to put this in is because we recently ran across some information that at one time in Cary history there were 2 railroad streets, if you can imagine. One was on the south side of Railroad Street, which is what is now Cedar Street, and the other one was north of the railroad tracks and is what is called Ambassador Loop today. It was Ambassador Drive, but they switched it to Ambassador Loop. There were 2 railroad streets at one time. You know, there was a North Railroad Street, which is Ambassador Loop. There was a South Railroad Street, which is now Cedar Street. And because they run east and west, I think it confused everybody, because usually if you've got like a north and a south street, it runs north and south. But these ran east and west, but they were North Railroad and South Railroad. So are you confused? Because I'm confused, and I think everybody else was confused. So in the early 1950s, the town decided to change North Railroad Street to Ambassador Drive. And that was named for Walter Hines Page. So we're getting a little bit of Page history here. Walter Hines Page was the son of the founder of Cary, Frank Page. He was born here, educated here. He was highly educated. He was educated privately in a home. He was at Cary High School for a short period of time. He was at the Bingham School, which is a sort of a military school for boys, which was located near Mebane. Then he went on to Randolph-Macon College in Virginia and to Johns Hopkins University. So he was highly educated. He majored in Greek and was a scholar. He was an author, a publisher, an editor. He really championed the cause of education, especially to help the South regain some footing after the Civil War. But his most famous position was as ambassador to the Court of St. James, which is to England, during World War I. He encouraged the United States to enter the war and end it, because it was just going on and on and on. And I think that it would have gone on much, much longer if America had not joined. So he impressed that upon Woodrow Wilson, and we finally joined the cause, and he was really, it really took it out of him. He developed serious health issues in 1918, had to resign his ambassadorship, sailed back to America, made it back home, and by this time his family was living in Aberdeen. He made it back to Aberdeen. The war victory was declared in November of 1918, and he died in December of 1918. So he was able to see the conclusion of the war. But it was named after him, and if you drill on Chatham Street, I don't know if you've noticed in front of Modern Service, which is a auto repair place, there is a sign for Walter Hines Page. It's our only state highway marker in the area, so it is for Walter Hines Page. Be sure to notice that when you're driving down Chatham or walking. Now, I put this picture in here because we're still back on Railroad Street. Remember, it's South Railroad Street, and it was unpaved for the longest amount of time, and I threw this in here because you can see, this is the street here, and it is unpaved, and in the back, you can actually see this is called Fettner Tower, and Fettner Tower was a small two-story building that had the railroad switches. There were 2 tracks, and they had to have switches. They were they were moved by hand, and Mr. Sam Smith would, go up there and do the switches for the railroad. And that's my dad playing croquet, along with my aunt, because they lived nearby. And it just shows like the early, I guess it was late 1930s here, that Railroad Street was still unpaved. It had been the main street of Cary, and it's still unpaved. But in 1952, the residents of Railroad Street said, hey, you named North at Railroad Street something different. We want to change the name of Railroad Street. So they petitioned, and the town granted the petition, and that's how it became Cedar Street, which I don't know why they picked Cedar Street. We can't figure that out, but I wish they had left it Railroad Street because it runs right by the railroad. And the railroad was such an important factor in Cary's development. We're going to wrap it up here with Page Street because we've been talking about Ambassador Loop and the Page family all through this program. And so we'll end up with Frank Page. Page Street is a little bit out of what we consider maybe downtown. It's still within the 1 square mile of Cary, original Cary. But if you go all the way down Harrison Avenue, well, let's just come down Academy Street. We're right here. So we're going to turn onto Dry Avenue. We're going to go through the stoplight at Harrison, and we're going to turn to the left on Page Street. And then it goes all the way up to Hillcrest Cemetery. And there's a sign that is right as you start up the hill on Page Street that says Hillcrest Cemetery, no outlet. And as my dad would say, it's better than dead end. So he would appreciate the laughter. Page Street is named for Allison Francis, or Frank Page as he was known, and Catherine Frances Rabbitoe Page. It took me a while, but I finally realized they both had Francis as their middle name. Frank was a man of many talents, I will say. I think he was the original entrepreneur. He was the man who could do just about anything. He didn't want Cary to be named after him, so he had it named after a temperance leader, because Frank Page was very much into the temperance movement, and it was named after Samuel Fenton Cary. I was talking to a lady here today who's from Ohio, and Samuel Fenton Cary was a temperance leader, and he was from Ohio. So that's how Cary got its name. I guess I should have started out with that. But there wasn't really even any street in Cary named for Frank Page for a while. But there is one today, so it does lead right up to Hillcrest Cemetery. And let's just do the Cliff Note versions of Frank Page's life, because we could spend a whole program on Frank Page. He started out his life on his father's plantation called Oakey Mount, which was in the Leesville area, so a little bit north of Raleigh. He really became kind of the poster boy for entrepreneurs because he struck out on his own very early in life. He went down to Cumberland County. He was logging and taking logs down the Cape Fear River to Wilmington. Very dangerous job. He met and married Catherine Rabbitoe. He moved back to Leesville around 1850. They got married in 1849. And he saw the railroad coming through Cary, which was not too far away from Louisville, as the opportunity to do logging in this area. So he bought 300 acres of land in what really is downtown Cary, and with the railroad right there, he had his business all set up for him. That was 1854. The 300 acres that he bought just happened to be the 300 acres that belonged to Ferris Yates. Remember Ferris Yates, we were talking about him, that had Bradford's Ordinary on it. Well, Frank upgraded the house. He added the 2-story building with all the Victorian gingerbread on the front of it, and there was a kitchen at some point that had been added out the back, but that was the Frank Page homestead, and it stood on the grounds of the town hall in Cary. These are actual photographs of the home. You can see poor little Bradford's Ordinary sort of squeezed in between there. It looks like it's, you know, being smushed. But those are a couple of different angles of the house. Unfortunately, this whole homestead burned down in 1970, right before Cary was getting ready to celebrate its 100th anniversary in 1971. So that was really a terrible loss for the town. I mean, we think of its terrible loss as being Frank Page's homestead, but I think of it as a terrible loss for Bradford's Ordinary. You know, that would have been wonderful to have, you know, just be able to evaluate that structure very closely. This is a representation of everything that Frank Page, you know, was believing in and did in his life. First of all, he was the first postmaster of Cary. Up in the top left corner is a handwritten postmark. The post office started here in 1856, so he was the first postmaster. The picture of the gentleman is Samuel Fenton Cary, the temperance leader, so Frank really adhered to that. Then he was all about education, and this is a partial shot of Cary High School, the first wooden building. And then about 1880s, early 80s, Frank sold out of Cary and went down to Aberdeen and started the town of Aberdeen. So that's a picture of Aberdeen down in the far left corner. But he wasn't finished building yet. Later in life, he built this magnificent hotel in Raleigh. It was called Mansion Park Hotel. I'm not following my notes today. He wanted a first-class hotel built in Raleigh that did not have a saloon. So he built the hotel there. Catherine died. He ended up being back in Raleigh, married a much younger woman, died shortly thereafter, and he was supposed to have been buried in Oakwood in Raleigh. That was in his will, but the children, who were very attached to their mother, came and got his body, and he is buried in Aberdeen, and that is his grave marker from the Bethesda Cemetery in Aberdeen. So he was a little bit of everything. Businessman, postmaster, Cary's first developer. He pretty much did it all. So, we've come full circle. We traveled through history today. We started at the old stage road in front of Bradford's Ordinary that became the home of Frank Page, to the road leading to the cemetery, where so many people who were instrumental in Cary's history were buried. We've explored the lives of doctors, hotel keepers. We've looked at the business district in the heart of Cary. So as you drive through downtown Cary, or as you walk through downtown Cary, you can kind of read some of the signs, and you can think about the connections that started way, way back before even Cary was Cary. So thank you for coming and giving me your attention this afternoon.
I thought I saw a sign just today, a street sign that looks brand new, that says Jones Street. from where the house was moved from.
Oh, my goodness.
And it looks like nothing there because a construction fence is there, but I believe that's what I saw on my way here today.
What, where the big construction is where the Ivy Ellington was?
Yes.
Oh, that was there before, but I think Jones is, that's not, I think they'll take that street sign down and name it something else when they get the development done. Yeah, for some reason it kind of appeared and, ended up there. But it's interesting that it's still there. I hadn't noticed that, so I have to go check that out. Yeah, I have to go check it out. Yeah. I took that slide out of the slideshow because I figured the sign wasn't there anymore. Other questions?
Yeah. So is it safe to assume that the Fenton Shopping Center is named after Samuel Fenton?
You get the gold star. You get the gold star. Yes, it was named for Samuel Fenton Cary, and the apartment complex is the Allison. So if you think Allison Francis Page, so yeah. So they were trying to capture a little bit of the history there. Yeah. Yes, Miss Catherine. Yeah.
And so the Templeton,
Yes.
so we have a couple of businesses, I guess.
Yeah.
Businesses that are, took the names and went on with that.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I should throw that in. Are you familiar with the Templeton as a retirement complex? And it's out across the street from Wakefield Cary. And so, yes, the Templeton has got its roots in Dr. Templeton, and they provide care for people just as he did. Yeah. And there used to be no home births in Cary, so if you, up until that hospital was built, when did they build that hospital? Everybody had to go to Rex Hospital in Raleigh to be born.
Late 80s, I think.
Late 80s, yeah.
Carla, the old stage road, what's its relationship to what we know as Chapel Hill Road today?
Chapel Hill Road. I think once it gets out to, the way that my dad described it was that it probably came in sort of along the railroad tracks around, round Railroad Street, and then kind of followed Hillsborough Street through the dump and on until you got to Maynard Road, where the Lowe's Home Improvement and the State Employees Credit Union is, and then it kind of crossed the tracks and would have joined Chapel Hill Road there.
So as part of Chapel Hill Road today, was it part of the old stage road? So that part.
Yeah,
that
possibly
western
so,
part.
yeah.
And can you share the connection of serendipity to Dr. Hunter?
Yes, yes. Well, why don't you?
She's putting me on the spot.
Because you like to eat at Serendipity.
I do love
too.
Serendipity. It's like the one place in Cary that hasn't changed in the 45 years that I've lived here. The wallpaper is the same thing. But it was originally Dr. Hunter's office. So the doctor that lived in the bungalow right out here, his office was Serendipity.
It was also the library.
And also was
It was the library at one time, and I remember reading Winnie the Pooh books there. That was my favorite thing. So,
Well, since we're sharing, will you also share about the dig when they were constructing this place on Chatham across from the trash
yes,
pile?
yes. When there's the office buildings on Chatham Street. There's two different ones, one's sort of a beige color and one's sort of a red color brick. They were doing some excavations along Chatham Street and dug up some iron. They ran into a pocket of like iron fittings. And the developer called me and said, I've got this stuff, why don't you come and take a look at it? So I did, and there had been a blacksmith shop on Railroad Street, and they were throwing away all their, the scraps at the back of their property, which eventually became Chatham Street, but it was like just a little lane, so they, they were just kind of tossing it out back. And so we got a bucket full of iron pieces and took them to the Page Walker. And one of the employees there was able to clean them and kind of identify some of the pieces from the blacksmith shop. It was Mr. Johnson. He ran a blacksmith shop, but he also built coffins. And repaired automobiles later on, so quite the business. Next month, we're going to do African-American street names and place names. And then in August, as Ms. Musa said, we're going to do street names that are a little further afield. So, we'll cover quite a lot of street signs over the summer, so I hope you'll come back for those.